Today we're beginning a brand new series called Freedom. Freedom. I think freedom is a huge commodity for you and I. It's one of the things that, was one of the foundations of our country. I think it's resonant in our hearts in a big way, especially for us Americans. I think, though, that freedom is sometimes very elusive, and so we're going to talk about freedom and what that looks like through the course of the next 4 weeks together. I'm really excited about this series because I think that this has the potential to be one of those series where you look back many years from now and you remember something that you heard or a response that you made to take a step towards truth, a step towards God, and God did something in your heart and in your life to begin to release you into a greater freedom to be the person that He's created you to be. And so I believe that this series has that much power in it as we look to the Word of God. One of the things as we begin, God invites us and He accepts us to come to Him exactly where we are. I think we get this messed up sometimes. We feel like we got to get things together first so that we're at least presentable. And God says, no, I want you to come to me just the way that you are. But His promise is He doesn't leave us that way. He begins to transform our lives, and He begins to set us on this path of freedom to become the people He's created us to be. And so I'm gonna jump right in this morning, and we're going to look a lot in the book of Genesis. And what I want to do is we look in the book of Genesis and some of the things that happen there are discover God's original design for the world and for you and I, and then look at where we are today and how we might have gotten here today, how the Bible describes it. And so as we begin this morning, we're going to start in Genesis chapter 1. If you do have a Bible or an app, you can pull it out this time. If not, we'll always put the words up on the screen. And it begins like this. In Genesis 1, God says, "Then God said, let us make mankind in our image." And there's a reason for this. God makes man in His image, in our likeness, so that, and this is the reason, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over all the livestock, and over all the wild animals, and over all creation, and everything that moves on the ground. Now look, God must think really highly of us because He's given us big responsibility. But it is because He thinks really highly of us. He creates us in His image. It goes on to say, so God created mankind, that's just generic for men and women, in His own image. And then God blessed them. And He said to them, be fruitful and increase. So He wants us to increase. He wants us to fill the earth. And He wants us, again, to subdue it or to rule over it. And then God looks at everything that He's made, and He looks at man in his place. And God saw everything He made, and He says, as He looks at it, this is really, really good. It's very good. This is good. This is what I want. So, as we look at the world today, it may not look exactly like it did back then. And in fact, it causes us to question about what is actually going on here. And I hope today that some of this will help us understand so that we're not surprised or overwhelmed, and we actually know what to do about it. But in the beginning here, it says that God primarily created us for His glory, for His glory. When my oldest was just a little girl, we used to ask her, and we put up this little game. We'd say, why did God create you? And she'd say, for His glory. That's based on Isaiah 43:7, which says that God created all things for His glory. In fact, there is what's called a catechism, which is just a process of teaching people about the faith, and the Westminster Shorter Catechism of Faith, which was used to teach new Christians about the faith, it asks this question, asks a series of questions, but it says this one question: what is the chief end of man? In other words, what is the purpose for his existence? What are we going for? What are we moving towards? Why are we even on the earth? And the answer, the response is, it says this: the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. That's why we exist. It is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. And this is how much God thinks of you. He created you and He created me in His image to be, as that other slide did say, representatives of Him in the earth, representatives of His rule, and reflections of His character and nature in the earth. In other words, we were supposed to harness all the creative potential of the world, take care of it, nurture it, cause it to grow, flourish, and cause the world to become a place where mankind would grow, thrive, and flourish. That's how much God thinks of us. That's how God initially set things up. But when we look at our world today, we got to admit, things don't quite look like that. In fact, it seems like something is just off. It's just wrong. And normally, what do? We normally look at other people and we go, I know what the problem is. It's them. They're really messed up over there, you know. It's those left-wing people who don't believe in the same thing that the right-wing people, or vice versa, right? Whichever party, we look at somebody else and we say it's them. Or it's that people group over there, and we usually can see it in other people, but we can't see it in ourselves that well most of the time. It's usually the government, or it's somebody who's responsible for what we're seeing in the earth. But oftentimes we have a hard time seeing it in ourselves. And so I want to look at the scriptures in Genesis because they really help us see the problem is not just out there. The problem is in here for all of us. All of us. The problem is our own heart. There's something going on here, but we don't know oftentimes how it happened or where it began, so we don't know what to do about it. And so I want to learn what we can do about the problem that's in here because we have these questions, right? I hear so many people say, why are there so many unhappy people in the world today? It seems like there's so many unhappy people. Even those who've achieved great things, or I should say especially those who achieve great things, there's still this sense of disappointment and sense of like, man, is that all there is? And there's a significant portion of people who are dealing with very real issues of mental health. It's just prevalent in our culture. How is that? How do we get from Genesis 1:26, where God creates everything, and it's amazing, and it's perfect, and he puts man and woman to cultivate it and nurture it, to what we see in our world today? It's very real. Why is there so much hatred and violence and killing? What's up with that? Why is there so much fear of death? Why is there so much death and destruction? And then why is there so much fear of it? Those are all legitimate questions. And so today I want to look at some of the origin of that so that we're not overwhelmed or surprised, because I think most of the time we're just overwhelmed and surprised that it's there and we don't know what to do about it. And so in Genesis chapter 3, we get a really big picture of what's going on there. So again, if you have your Bible this morning, turn to Genesis chapter 3. I want to look at this because Genesis chapter 3 basically shows the downfall of things really quickly. In Genesis chapter 3, God gives Adam and Eve this incredible world, and Adam and Eve have the attention span of a 2-year-old child hyped up on Mountain Dew as far as moral attention, and they do everything that God says don't do really quickly. And so check this out. This is really going to be helpful. We're going to read this in 2 different sections. I'm going to focus primarily on the second section of it, okay? So Genesis chapter 3, we get a little picture of why the world is the way that it is right now as we currently see it. So here's what happens. Now there is a serpent that was more crafty than any of the other wild animals that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God really say, you must not eat from the tree, from any tree in the garden? Now, let me explain what's happening here. We're not really told how the serpent enters the picture. But what we do know about the serpent is that he is a creature in rebellion against God, and he has a determined plan to lead humanity in that same rebellion against God. This is really important. And we see a strategy that he employs here that's the same strategy that's been employed in our lives today. This is the initial attempt of Satan to attack humanity. And the way that he does it is by trying to convince them of a lie rather than believe the truth. This is so important for us because the things that we believe, they determine how we feel and also how we behave. This last week, there was a portion of my week, it was just dark. And as I thought about, like, man, why am I feeling like this? I traced it all the way back to a dark thought that I had, that I just allowed to grow and grow and grow. And the things that we believe, those become the seeds of not only our feelings, but they become the seeds of our actions. So the enemy is always trying to pull us away into his rebellion by convincing us of lies and not believing the truth anymore. And so we see that here, and he's going to continue doing this. And so he tells the woman, didn't God say that you're not allowed to eat any of the trees of the garden, which is a lie? God said you can eat anything, but there's this one tree that you're not supposed to eat. So the woman said to the serpent, and she corrects him, we may actually eat from the trees of the garden. But God did say, you must not eat from the tree that's in the middle of the garden. You must not touch it, or, and this was what God said, if you do, you will die. Which means our relationship will be broken. You will exist. You will cease to exist in relationship with me, and what I've given you, you're going to lose. And so now this tree is not confusing. This tree is actually representative of a moral choice. God puts Adam and Eve, this perfect created being, in this perfect environment to be representatives and reflections of Him and to cultivate, to nurture, to cause it to grow. And they now have a moral choice about how they're going to go about doing this, how they're going to go about reflecting God, how they're going to go about representing Him and building in the garden. They have a choice. Are they going to trust in God and receive His leadership, His loving leadership over their lives, or are they going to reject God and be the masters of their own lives and do it apart from Him? It's a moral choice about how they're going to live and how they're going to do this. And so this is a big one for them right there. And the devil comes back and he's got a real good answer. He says, "You're not going to die. You're not going to die." The serpent said to the woman, "For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And so he basically said, no. You've been told something that's not true. You won't die. You won't die. In fact, He's really holding out on you. He doesn't want you to be like Him. You really can't trust Him. He doesn't seem to have your own best interest in mind. You don't need Him. In fact, you will be freer if you break free from Him. That's the lie. You will be freer if you break free from Him. The true path to life and to freedom is to get rid of those constraints, is to be the master of your own life. And this is the biggest lie, because when they attempt to break free from God, they're breaking free from the giver of life, from the one who actually gave them the life and sustains them and is the source of their life. And there's going to be a sense of loss, but they can't resist the temptation to break free. Now, I totally get this temptation, because I lived many of my life being the master of my own life. And I went to church and was still the master of my own life. So just in case you go, "Well, I go to church," just because you go to church doesn't mean you're not the master of your own life. I went to church for many years, and I was the master of my own life. And so when the woman hears this, "You will certainly not die," she saw the fruit of the tree, that it was good for food, it was pleasing to the eye, also desirable for gaining wisdom, and she ate it. So she believed the lie. Believing that lie resulted in an action of disobedience towards God. She rejected God in this moment, and she grabbed hold of the desire to be the master of her own destiny. I can do this. He said that the freedom problem is because I've actually listened to God, and having Him over my life is not leading me to freedom, so I need to break free. So she believes the lie. She takes and she eats, and she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. So they believe the lie. And instead of having God's loving leadership over their life, they reject that. They disobey God. They break free from Him. And immediately they sense that something has changed. This thing that they had with God, they don't have it anymore, and they can kind of feel it. This is the doctrine, for those of you who care, of original sin. This is God's original description of how man rejects Him to be the master, to be the God of his own life. And when he does this, and when she does this, it doesn't actually lead to greater freedom. It actually leads to greater death. It actually leads to greater struggle. It actually leads to greater destruction. This is the original sin. And this is not just their sin. This is our sin too, right? This is the same thing that we do. And like I said, for 20 years of my life, this is exactly how I lived my life. I was the master of my life. I was the one who wanted to call the shots and do what I wanted to do. And I didn't want anybody to whom I was accountable to or was telling me what to do. I was the captain of my ship and my life and my destiny. And I did most of that while I was sitting in church. So you can do that. You can come to church and you can still be the master of your own life. I did that. And immediately when they do this, original sin, it leads to original shame. They sin and immediately they feel that something has changed. And so I want to focus on the major portion of what we're going to talk about today on these next portion of scriptures. After the original sin is this moment of shame and then hiding. And so when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food, it was pleasing to the eyes and also desirable to gain wisdom, she took and she ate. And it says, and then the eyes of both of them, they were open. They had a new consciousness or new awareness. And they realized they were naked. Everybody just say naked. Come on, this is my opportunity for you to say naked in church. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Naked. Yeah, thank you. Right on. They were naked. They were naked. They were naked. Previously, they were naked, and they were not ashamed. In fact, after God created everything, one of the last things he says before we read this is that Adam and Eve, they were both naked, and they felt no shame. But now something has changed. They were naked, and so this is what their nakedness caused them to do. They sewed fig leaves. They realized something has changed, and they hide themselves from each other, Adam and Eve. They sew fig leaves as coverings to cover up their sense of nakedness, their sense that they're exposed. And then the man and his wife, they heard the voice of the Lord, the sound of the Lord in the garden as he was walking in the garden in the cool of day. And then they hid themselves from God amongst the trees of the garden. But the Lord, he called to the man. He said, "Where are you?" And he answered, and he heard him. He said, "I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked. And so I hid." And then he asked this really cool question, which we're going to focus on today. Who told you you were naked? Wait a minute. Something's changed. Who told you that? Have you eaten from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from? So there are 3 questions that are really important here. And I'm just going to talk about one today. But I want to tell you why God asked these questions. And these are really important. He says, where are you? Who told you that you were naked? And then, have you eaten from that tree that I told you not to? Have you? Now, God is not unaware of what has happened. He knows what's going on. So these are not informational questions. These are relational questions. Wait, where are you? Because we used to be like that. When I came, you were always waiting for me to be there. But now, where are you? And it's not that God doesn't know. It's Adam doesn't know that something has changed. Why is it before he was naked and unashamed, but now he's naked and ashamed? So much so that he's hiding from God. Something has changed. Now, just to take a real brief tangent, because this is going to help us for the rest of our series. Why does God ask us information that he already knows the answer to? You ever thought about that? He'll do that today in your life. It's part of our healing process. It's part of our journey of wholeness and part of our journey of salvation. It's part of the journey of you and I experiencing freedom. God asks us things that we already know the answer to. And the reason why he does that is because he is described as a wonderful counselor. If any of you have ever gone to counseling, you know the job of a counselor is not just to tell you all the things that you can't see. It's actually to lead you in a process of self-discovery. Your healing, your wholeness, and in this case, salvation and freedom come in the process of discovering the truth, of realizing an answer for ourselves, discovering the truth, and then admitting what's really going on. If you can't admit what's really going on, you may be able to find the answer. You may be able to discover truth, but admitting, making confession, and in this case, telling God back what is going on is going to bring healing, is going to bring salvation, is going to bring wholeness, is going to bring freedom to Adam and Eve. And God knows that because he is an amazing counselor. And he doesn't just come into our lives and tell us what to do. He usually leads us to the discovery, the answer ourselves, to the discovery of truth. And then he gives us the opportunity to admit back, to tell back to him this truth. And when we do, that's when healing comes. That's when restoration comes. That's when salvation comes. That's when freedom comes. God knows this. In fact, just one chapter later, he does this with a guy named Cain. Cain is about to kill his brother. He's very angry with his brother in Genesis chapter 4. And God comes to Cain. He doesn't say, "Hey, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're going to do. Don't do it." He asks him this question: "Why are you so angry?" He's trying to lead him in this process of self-discovery. And Cain tells him, "Well, it's because my brother." And God says, "Well, is that really the problem? Is the problem really your brother?" Because God knows it's something different. There's something after the facade that he's put up. It's something in Cain. And what we find out in Cain is jealous of his brother. That's why he kills his brother. But God is giving him, and he's so gentle when he does this, and he does this throughout the scriptures. He comes, and as a wonderful counselor, he begins to lead us to the discovery of the truth. He begins to lead us to the answer, and he gives us the opportunity to admit what's really going on. And so God asks these 3 questions to do that. And so this one question today as we look at this, who told you that you were naked? This is really important. Who told you that you're naked? In fact, if we can understand this question, this will help us understand a lot of things about the world that we live in, a lot of things about ourselves, a lot of things about why people do what they do, and how we can break free from doing some of those things. Who told you that you were naked? Now, the reason why this question, I think, is so important is because previous to this, Adam was already naked. So it's not like, hey, I'm something that I wasn't. God says, wait a minute. You were naked before Adam. Who told you that you were naked? In other words, what is it that has brought about this awareness now that you're naked? And why is this such a painful thing for you? What is it that you know now? Who messed with you? Who told you something? Who came in and messed with your life now and changed things? And now that you're aware that you're naked, when in verse 7 it says the eyes of Adam were opened up and he realized he was naked, it doesn't mean like he was physically blind and then one day he opened up his eyes and he looked down and like, I'm naked. It's not what it means. It means he has a new consciousness that there's something wrong with nakedness. And there's a shame attached to it. Now, nakedness in the scriptures, especially at this point in the Bible in the original form, it just meant to be so known that you were vulnerable. So you were so comfortable being known that you were vulnerable. So nakedness is vulnerability. You're just free to be vulnerable. And before this moment, Adam would open the door when God came knocking on the door, and he was completely naked and completely vulnerable, and his exposure was not a threatening thing. But now, something has happened, and when he feels exposed, he feels ashamed, and he feels unacceptable, and he feels inadequate, and he feels like something is missing in their relationship. So what has happened? What has happened? It's the same thing that happens to all of us. It's the fact that sin comes into our lives. And there's an impurity with sin, and there's an inadequacy with sin. And instead of being vulnerable with our lives, like we were created to be, we got to hide, we got to cover, and we got to control the information because we're afraid of not being loved. If you really know, if I'm really exposed, if you can see beyond the fig leaf that I'm wearing, I'm afraid that you will not love me. Now, this puts us all in a really big tension because we all live this way. We all do. We all live this way. And the thing that we were really created to be is naked and unashamed. So we're all created to be naked and unashamed, but the reality is we're all naked and ashamed. And I got to tell you, and this is not like, oh man, Pastor was talking about just like being free and not wearing clothes. You hear what I'm saying, right? It's the vulnerability. It's being not afraid to be exposed and still loved. Because now Adam and Eve feel like the only way they can be loved is if they're not known. They've got to cover themselves. They've got to control what other people know about them, what they know about each other, because they're afraid of being naked and exposed and open and vulnerable. And the greatest experience in life and what we were created for, the scripture actually tells us, is to be naked and unashamed, is to be vulnerable, is to have that kind of intimate relationship with somebody. Those of you who are married, hopefully you totally get this. This is the beauty of marriage. This is the beauty of marriage. And see, for every weekend I come up here and, I'll just be honest with you, my routine, I take a shower, comb my hair. You get to see me at my best. I iron my clothes for you. I brush my teeth for you. I do all these things, and I present the best me for you. I'm not trying to fake it. I just take care to put together. However, I live with a woman who sees me at my worst. You see me at my best. She sees me at my worst. She sees me when I'm grumpy. She sees me when I'm acting like a punk. She sees me when I'm angry. She sees me when I'm disrespectful to her, when I'm disrespectful to the kids. She sees me at my worst. But the beauty of marriage is you're in relationship with somebody who can completely know you and yet loves you. And even at my worst, she looks at me and she says, I don't like all of that, but I love you. And that is the best place in the world to be. That's what we were created for, to be absolutely known and loved. And Adam and Eve are feeling the pain They don't feel like they can be known anymore because, God, we did something that you said not to do. And we know that you know. And so instead, they got to hide themselves, and there's this sense of impurity, this loss of righteousness, this loss of relationship with God, this sense of inadequacy, and nakedness used to be this total sense of radical vulnerability in relationship, and now nakedness is this painful, traumatic thing to them. Nakedness is synonymous with we failed and we're falling short and I'm unacceptable. And so they cover themselves and they hide. And you know what? We do the same thing. We do the same thing. We have lots of different ways that we do this same type of thing. So I'm just going to go through a couple of them just to help us. Help us with this sense of loss that we have. Help us with this sense of inadequacy and being unacceptable. Help us with the fact that all of this started when we sinned. When we sinned, it led to this shame. Nakedness became a negative thing. And instead of being open and vulnerable, we feel like we have to cover up and we have to control the information that other people receive about our lives. So we hide from each other. We put fig leaves on. We hide from God behind trees. And then we hide from ourselves, which is the worst place to be, right? When God asks them, hey, what's going on? How do you know you're naked? Did you eat from the tree? You know what they start doing? They're hiding from themselves. They start blaming each other. Eve says, no, well, the snake, he caused it. And then Adam says, God says, Adam, where were you in this whole thing? And then Adam says, well, the woman that you gave me, he blames Eve. And so instead of taking ownership, they start to hide from themselves. And so here's just a couple ways that we hide our inadequacies and our unacceptable. And we know part of this is just part of life, right? If you're going to go out on a date and you invite somebody over to your house, what do? You may never clean your house. But if you have dinner guests, you go to work cleaning your house, right? You put all the dirty clothes, at least you shove them underneath the bed, out of sight, right? You get rid of all the unacceptable things and cover up, and that's okay. I don't want to come up to your house with your dirty clothes hanging out anyway. But we do that, right? But when we do that with our own personal lives, this is where it gets funky and it says something about us. So Instagram should be figleaves.com. That's what all Instagram is, man. It is everybody throwing up fig leaves. How's your life? My life is great. My life is the best. We had dinner. The weird thing about it is, doesn't it make us sometimes depressed or sad because our life doesn't look like somebody else's fig leaf? Yeah. We look at their fig leaf and go, man, their fig leaf's better than my fig leaf. And then I start to feel bad about myself because I can't put up a good fig leaf like they put up a good fig leaf. And I get jealous because there's fig leaves. There's something deeper than what we put up, right? So I'm going to ask this in a series of why questions. Why do some of us bury ourselves in our work and in our busyness? Why do we do that? Not that work and being busy is not a bad thing, but we gauge ourselves and our productivity and our worth by how much we put in, how much work, and how busy I am. And many of you know that is a terrible gauge for that. In fact, some of you are so strung out and so busy right now that you're about to just tap out. But you keep doing it because there's something that is driving you to put up that fig leaf of work. I'm worthwhile. I'm productive. I'm doing stuff. I'm getting stuff done. Why do we do that? Why is it that some of us are always rescuing other people and we feel it's so hard for us to disappoint other people? Why is that? Why do we need to be needed? Why do we need to help? I'm not saying that helping people is bad, but our fig leaf is we're just rescuing and we're helping. And when I say no, I don't know why, but it really bothers me. It bothers me because I don't want to be rejected by you or feel like I'm rejecting you. And there's something inside that this fig leaf of work and busyness and helping people and rescuing people is putting up. Here's really interesting. Why do some of us hide behind anger? We hide behind anger. We're angry because a couple different reasons. Number one, we can keep people far enough away so they can't see beyond the fig leaf if we always just kind of angry. You're just a tough person. You don't want to get too close or let people get too close because it's a really good way of keeping people far enough away from your fig leaf they can't see beyond that. Or it just becomes an environment where you can blame all your stuff on other people who make you angry. Well, it's my boss. Well, it's my coworker. They're the problem for my problem. They're the reason for my problem. And what we do is we're really putting up fig leaves of anger to mask the fact that I got something else going on. You with me so far? Yeah. You guys are just quiet because you're listening, right? Okay. So why do some of us always blame other people? Why is the problem always somebody else? Why is it always their deficiency, that fig leaf? It's their fault. It's not my fault. It's my spouse's fault. Man, if he would only, if he wouldn't snore so much, or whatever, and some of it's real. I just outed myself. Sorry about that. Why do some of us live so defensively? This is where we begin to put up fig leaves in our own selves, in ourselves. We begin to defend and justify. And I feel like if I make a mistake or failure, to own it, it's so painful for me. What is that? What is that fig leaf of it's not really my fault and I tried my hardest and you know what, it's really not that bad. What is that thing that in us can't own when we fail? And those are some of the fig leaves that we put up. For some of us, it's religion. We're so busy doing things for God and working for God to try and put up and earn the favor and approval of God or the attention of other people, that we're just working, and we're almost at the point of exhaustion. But it's a fig leaf for us. And this last one, again, we'll just circle back around to Instagram. Why do some of us have to be absolutely attractive to the opposite sex? Why is it so important for me that I just look, I want you to see me the way that I look, and we work really hard to create that image and put it out there. I'll tell you what it is for all of us. For all of us, we just have a very real and inherent sense of our inadequacies and our acceptabilities. We just know our flaws and our weaknesses. And we're so uncomfortable with them. We feel like we have to control the information. We have to cover up, because I will not be loved if you know who I really am, if you can see behind my fig leaf. So we put up fig leaves, we hide, and then we hide from ourselves. And there is this intense sense that all of us have, whether you're a follower of Christ or not, it's this thing that either bothers you or makes you excited. It's the intense sense that God, who created you and who loves you, he sees your life in its entirety. And don't take that as like a negative thing. You know, when I was a little kid, my parents would tell me, and don't do this. They would tell me, you know, when we're with you, we see what's going on, but you're going to go out with your friends, and we're not going to be there. But God sees everything. You know, I was like, oh my gosh, you know, that's a bad trip to put on somebody. Don't do that. That's not how it should feel. But the truth is, the loving eyes of our God see everything. In fact, Hebrews tells us this: nothing, no creature is hidden from his sight, but all things are uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of whom we have to give an account. So that can make us feel uncomfortable, and so we end up trying to bury ourselves in layers of fig leaves. And you know what the truth is, the reality is that we can't do it. It just doesn't help. All we do is get buried under those fig leaves, and all we do is convince ourselves that everything is right, all right, and it's just not. And there's nothing we can do on our own to cover ourselves with enough fig leaves to make ourselves feel acceptable. There's nothing we can do to fix that inadequacy. There's nothing we can do. And so when God comes into the garden and he sees Adam and Eve, or he doesn't see them hiding, he doesn't reject them. He doesn't blame them. He doesn't come and tear them down. He searches them out. God searches us out. And instead of allowing themselves to cover with fig leaves, God says, I've got something that will really help you. And he takes an animal. You can put that scripture up there. 21, verse 21. He takes an animal. He sacrifices an animal. And instead of the fig leaves, he takes the skins of a sacrificed animal to cover them, to cover their nakedness, to cover their inadequacy, to cover their unacceptability, to cover their impurity, to cover their shame. God provides for that. He himself does that. He's the only one who can. He's the only one who can cover our sin. He's the only one who can do that. When I was a little kid, and we did this with our kids too. I was trying to ask them yesterday to recollect this, but there was a period of time when they would have me take them to bed. In fact, they wouldn't go, they would all play like dead weight, you know, until Daddy carried them to bed, took them to bed, and then when I put them in bed, I just have this recollection this one time, putting one of my sons in bed, and I was walking away, and he's just like, he was like flapping around like his arms were dead, and what's the issue? You have to put the covers on me. And son, you're old enough to do that. And he's like, you know. I remember doing it with my dad too. Because, Daddy, nobody covers me like you do. And you know, in our lives, you can cover yourselves with fig leaves. You can try and hide your sin and your unacceptability, and it will not get the job done. All it will do is layer of fig leaf and fig leaf, and just bury your issues deeper under fig leaves. There's only one who can really cover you, who can cover our nakedness, who can cover our shame, and who can cover our sin. And that's our Heavenly Father. Nobody does it like our dad. So he comes into the garden and he sacrifices these animals. And this is a picture of what he's eventually going to do. And then in Romans 4:7, Paul, now looking down the corridor of history in the New Testament, Paul says this, that this is what he said, blessed are those whose transgressions are forgiven and whose sins are, everybody say that with me, covered. Sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord will never count against them. And God's history of dealing with his people was continually searching after his people who were unacceptable, who were broken, who were flawed, who were hiding. And instead of just like, why did you do that? How could you do that? He covers their sin. Hosea, just a beautiful book. We don't have time to talk about the whole thing. Hosea is a prophet of God, is a person who speaks on behalf of God, and God has this person marry a prostitute, which is really like, why did he do that? And this prostitute would go out in the night, she would get abused by men, she would oftentimes come home naked, and God says, I want you to take her home, and I want you to love her and cover her. And it's a picture of what our God does. We go out, we mess ourselves up, and God says, I'm searching for you, and I want to bring you home, and I'm going to cover you. Not like those who've exposed you. Because the lie of the devil is if you go to God, oh, no, and he sees your impurity and he sees your unacceptability, he's going to take advantage of you. He doesn't have your best interest in mind. He's going to expose you. That's what he's going to do. The truth is, he wants to cover you. He wants to bring you into this place where he can cover you. Isaiah says that God covers us with garments of salvation and robes of righteousness. When we have sacrificed our righteousness and given up a right relationship with God, God says, I will make it right for you, and I will cover you. You can't do it on your own. You can't recoup what you've lost. So this is the way that he did it. He sent his son Jesus into the earth. And Jesus died on a cross in our place. And when he did that, he died the death that we should have died, and he bore our sin. He bore our sin so that he could give us forgiveness, so that he could give us righteousness, so that our sin could be covered from the eyes of God. The only eyes that really matter, the eyes that see everything, Jesus comes so that our sin can be covered from the eyes of God, the pure, the holy, the righteous eyes of God. And when Jesus dies on the cross, he dies a shameful death. He is mocked, he's abused, he's tormented, he's sent out naked carrying a cross. He looks terrible. He's put up on a cross for hours, exposed before all people. And in this moment, what is happening is God is bearing our shame so that he can take our shame off of us, and he puts it onto Jesus so that you can have covering from your sin. So that I can have covering for my sin. So that even though I am totally unacceptable and totally inadequate, I can stand up in this world and be totally naked and unashamed. Because God covers me with the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. There's nothing freer than that.